Today we're going to have a look at the Cybex Priam. The Priam launched in 2015, and from the beginning it was aimed at the upper end of the market. Here in Norway, it's part of a new wave of sort of high-end, mid and heavy-sized strollers that are trying to compete with established brands like Bugaboo and Stokke. In this review, we're going to take an in-depth look at this model, focusing on functionality and mechanics in order to establish whether it lives up to its price tag, which from a repair standpoint is kind of a tall order, as not only is it up against some pretty solid competitors, but most other Cybex models we've looked at in the past have been a bit subpar. Now, I'll start with a few statistics. So it weighs 8 kilos, that's with the seat. When it's folded down, it's 95 by 58 by 31 centimeters. In terms of capacity, it carries 5 kilos in the underslung shopping basket, which is a little bit on the light side, and the seat is standard, so up to 17 kilos, really up until the end of when you would be using the stroller. Okay, we'll start by looking at comfort, how comfortable it is for you to use, and how comfortable it is for your child to sit in. This is the Lux seat, and the Lux seat is actually quite nice, although it looks very ergonomic. It is not a bucket seat, it is a highly adjustable seat, one of the few on the market that is capable of folding entirely flat. It's adjustable both in terms of its recline and in terms of the footrest itself. It looks deceptively large. I do wish that you could actually remove the extra padding here so that you could fit an even larger child in it as your child grows, but at the same time, it's not horribly small in comparison to the market. In relation to driving, this stroller as a mid-size stroller is going to function best in urban environments and light terrain, and you will notice the difference between this and a sturdier stroller if you are trying to go anywhere off pavement. I found that even with a new Priam, just going over gravel and dirt roads can be a bit bumpy. In relation to folding, it has an easy folding system, and there are kind of some pluses and minuses when you look at the folding system mechanically. It is, though, very easy to fold down. You can fold it down very comfortably with the seat on the stroller itself, which makes it quite handy if you want to just throw it over your shoulder or carry it upstairs and so on. Size and weight on this is a bit light for a mid-size stroller and a little bit large for a mid-size stroller when it's folded up. I like strollers that are larger when they're folded up because it gives you a little bit more feeling of stability and sturdiness as you're driving the stroller. In relation to textiles and maintenance, it's very easy to remove all of the textiles from the stroller if you need to wash them, and maintenance is quite easy on this model as well. It doesn't have any brake wires, it doesn't have air-filled tires, so there's no pumping needed. You should do a little bit of spraying of silicone spray and other sorts of lubricants in order to keep it functioning properly, but it's not going to be very heavy duty in relation to maintenance needs. Okay, we're going to look at the mechanics of the Priam now, top to bottom, starting with the handle and the central locking mechanism. So there are pluses and minuses to this. The plus to the way the handle and the central locking mechanism functions is that after you slide down the handle and you want to collapse the stroller, only the front and back ends need to be movable, need to swing towards each other. This means that you have a much more sturdy setup inside the central locking mechanism because there's no need to alter the rigidity of the handle to the front end axis. So that's really good. It's particularly good if you want to use the two-wheel mode. They borrow the two-wheel mode from the Bugaboo Chameleon, used as a means of getting upstairs or driving your stroller on sand. It makes it a lot more sturdy than the Chameleon, for example, when you're using that two-wheel mode. The minuses of the handle and the central locking mechanism in general is that there are still, even with that rigidity, quite a lot of points of connection and quite a lot of complex mechanisms. So anytime you have this button setup that runs down the inside, you have wires that can break and connection points to those wires both at the top and the bottom, and you have a certain amount of inbuilt looseness. This is a brand new stroller, and the handle is already loose from the outset inside the wider sleeve down here. This means that over time it will get a bit rickety and loose overall. In addition, when you are pushing down the stroller all the way to fold it, the handle has to be forced down onto these two additional buttons down below. And that's going to take a certain amount of pressure in order to do that. And I have a feeling over time that that can cause breakage with these buttons that are made of plastic, of course, and simply because you have to use so much force in order to activate that folding mechanism. Okay, we're going to have a look at the lower back end, the suspension and the brakes. It does have dedicated suspension, and it does look as though it has decent suspension. but after testing it, I find that the suspension is definitely subpar. You're not going to manage any sort of real terrain. But then you wouldn't expect that from a mid-size stroller. So all I mean with that is don't be fooled by the shiny springs, both in the back and the front. This stroller does not have tremendously great suspension. But the real concern with the back end actually comes to the brakes. So you have this brake pedal in the middle, and we've had several customers who have complained that it's very easy to accidentally activate the brake lever, especially when you fill up the shopping basket or when you try to use the two-wheel mode. The brake lever can become accidentally activated, and it can be a bit pain in the butt in order to deactivate it and continue using the stroller. From a more mechanical standpoint, as opposed to just design, the brake pedal, of course, activates two pins. Pop out of the side here and lock into the wheels. It's a very common design. The problem is that these pins are not made of metal. There is a metal wire that runs through the middle, and then there is a plastic cylinder around the outside, and that is going to prevent it from having a certain amount of rigidity in relation to the way the whole brake system works. And we have found in several cases that the brakes do tend to hang on one wheel, and you have to roll the stroller a bit forth and back in order to get it moving again. And this is with newer strollers that haven't been used very much. In addition, that plastic, after a while, will most likely wear down and break, necessitating a replacement of parts. In general, replacing parts on this model is very difficult because there are not a lot of screws that are visible and easy points to open up the mechanisms themselves. It's going to take a lot of prying with flathead screwdrivers, which will of course damage the way that the plastic looks on the stroller itself. And since the key selling point of the stroller is its look, you will wind up with a lot of dings and nicks and so on. Okay, you're gonna have a look at the front end then. There is a certain amount of suspension, again, built into the design of the fork, but it is not really sufficient to allow for any sort of real terrain use. Other than that, the swivel lock mechanisms are okay. It's sort of a standard sort of design. It has a pin that runs out of the front part of the mechanism and fits in these two holes here and here. If you're locking the front wheels, it's important to do it with the wheel facing backwards. That is the lock for that. As far as using the two-wheel mode, you would then use the opposite hole in order to lock it forward. It's an okay design. I've seen it fail sometimes. Sometimes the pin can rub out the plastic here and make it not lock properly, but there are worse designs for front wheel swivel locks. The part that concerns me about the front end is that there's no inbuilt defense against wobbly problems. A lot of strollers will put a suspension pad in order to press down on the fork and thus reduce the amount of wear that the axle does to the inside of the housing mechanism. There's nothing like that on this stroller, and so I thus would expect over time that there will be a lot of wobbly problems with the front wheels as the axle starts to wear down the mechanism. Looking at the wheels as independent from the chassis itself, the wheels are actually of a decent quality. It's very nice to see larger front wheels on a mid-sized stroller. That does allow for a certain increased ability in terms of drivability and so on. And what they've used for their non-air-filled tires is also quite good. A lot of stroller manufacturers use a foam that gets very quickly filled up with little rocks and pebbles as you drive it over rough terrain, whereas this is a much thicker and sturdier rubber, which will withstand a lot more wear than other sorts of tires. They do have a few different types. They have some terrain tires and but the differences are really minuscule between the different types of wheels. It's like maybe an extra ½ inch and a little bit of bumps or studs in order to help you over terrain, but it's really not going to have that much effect. Overall though, all the wheels for the Priam are quite good. So then, taking into account these strengths and weaknesses, I'd like to conclude by saying that the Priam is a decent stroller in most respects. Better than some, worse than others, but it is overpriced. I've felt this way about other Cybex strollers as well, that if they dropped their price point by around 15-20%, then they would have a competitive stroller. Of course, I don't really think cheap is their marketing tactic. It's rather the opposite. With designer seat options upward of $2,000, it's almost as though they're trying to use a high price itself to will their way into the upper bracket of the stroller market. Don't get me wrong, the quality materials and engineering on the stroller is okay, sort of right down the middle market-wise, but I wouldn't call it ingenious. It's a new design, and I expect it to improve over time, as all strollers do. If you live in an urban environment, or even suburban, but not the country, and you have size and weight issues like a small car or the need to transport it upstairs on a regular basis, then the Priam might be right for you. Don't think of it as a terrain capable though, or capable of carrying a lot in the basket. My personal preference is for a heavier stroller or a three-wheeler, but if you're looking for a mid-sized stroller, then I would put the Priam as a competitor for third place, mechanically speaking, below the Bugaboo Fox and the Stokke Explorer, but above the Chameleon. In any case, we hope this video was interesting to you, and if it was, we ask that you subscribe as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.